Hi everyone. In this video, I'm going to be going over non-declarative memory. Okay, so this is the last part of the memory series. Not this chapter, just the memory series. Okay, so the first thing we're going to be going over is what is non-declarative memory. In the last video, we learned that declarative memory was the form of memory where everything was set in stone, right? Set in stone. In stone. Or in other words, it was all facts, data, and events, right? Things that you have to experience to learn. Well, I mean, this also you have to experience, but we'll get into that. Um, so basically, non-declarative memory is the memory that you don't think about. So this is the type of memory you don't think about. You don't think about. So in order to understand this, we need to revisit declarative memory, right? So let's say you learned a lesson in history about the capitals and all of that, right? So your hippocampus, let's just say, let's use a different color. Let's say that this is your hippocampus and it creates a new memory, right? It creates a new, I'm going to use blue for a new memory, right? So what actually happens, and is a really common misconception, is that your hippocampus does not store your memories. It simply makes them. It doesn't it doesn't like store them, not store, right? So what happens is that once the memory is made, it needs to be stored in a place, right? So where it goes is it goes to the cerebral cortex of the brain, right? So it'll be stored in your frontal lobe. Here, let's draw that cerebellum. Okay, so let's say this is just, that's an abnormally large spinal cord. I apologize. Okay, so here we go. So what it'll do is it'll go to the cerebral cortex. Remember, that's the top layer of your brain, cerebral cortex, and get stored in a network of connections there. So it mostly stores in your frontal lobe, that's the frontmost lobe, right? So it'll be stored in a connection of groups of neurons. So it'll be embedded in the frontal lobe or your cerebral cortex. So how you access this is by thinking of the memory, right? Your frontal lobe and your prefrontal cortex will navigate through all these circuits and your networks. Remember, we went over that in the first video. They're groups of neurons interconnected. So it'll navigate through the chains until it finds that memory and you retrieve it, right? So the hippocampus creates it and then it's stored, right? But this is only for declarative memory because you have to learn this and you have to consistently, we'll get into this in their next video where it's like how you form the long-term memories. So what we learned here is that your brain has separate regions to encode the memories. I'm just going to erase some of these because that looks really weird. Okay, so we know that there are separate regions in the brain that are associated with creating and storing memories, right? So I'm going to make these areas like blue where your information is stored, right? But non-declarative memory is special in the sense that you learn it differently. So non-declarative memory is the type of memory which you don't have to think about. You just do it. So I think in the memory lesson I went over something called motor learning, right? So the motor learning is it just becomes natural for you. Example is riding a bike, touch typing, right? You don't think about how to do it. You just do it, but you still had to learn it, right? So this happens because this information doesn't it's hypothesized to not actually hit the hippocampus. What people think and what a common hypothesis is that these informations are stored and encoded using three main structures in the brain called the basal ganglia, cerebellum, and the prefrontal cortex. So this information is created and stored in distinct regions of the brain. It's not associated with the normal declarative memory regions of the hippocampus and the cerebral cortex. It's associated with these regions. So the basal ganglia is known as the habit center. I find that quite intuitive because, okay, when you're tying your shoes, you don't think about how to do it, it's a matter of habit. So that's why the basal ganglia is involved, and it's basically the center which reinforces good behavior, and it's basically the place that creates your habits. That's your basal ganglia. It's called your habit center. And then you have the cerebellum. We learned about cerebellum, right? The cerebellum is the region associated with consistently it's associated with motor learning. So I believe this one is also kind of self-intuitive learning. Also, motor learning is a type of non-declarative memory. Just I hope you guys remember that, not to be confused with spatial. So spatial memory, that's declarative. Motor learning is not declarative. And then prefrontal cortex, that's the tipmost part of your frontal lobe. It's associated with majority of your aspects of personality, all of those things, right? Personality, decision making, executive thinking, all of that. So executive thinking, executive function, executive function. And I believe this one is not that intuitive, but it makes sense because your prefrontal cortex is what helps you learn, right? So if it helps you learn, it's most likely involved in implicit memory, right? So yeah, I hope this makes sense. Basically, the summary is that declarative memory requires different parts of the brain than what non-declarative memory requires. And declarative memory requires active recall, where you have to constantly think about what you want. You have to think about that information. Whereas not in non-declarative memory, it's you just retrieve it. You don't think twice about it. When you lean down to tie your shoes, you don't think to yourself, okay, how do I tie my shoes? I take one loop, I twist it up. No, you just do it. Or when you're touch typing, you don't look for each individual key, you just know that it's there, right? So that's consistent practiced memory. So I hope this was able to clarify any doubts. And the next video is going to be on LTP and LTD, which is actually one of my absolute favorite topics. So yeah, thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions, as usual, please email me at stemwme@gmail.com or leave a comment. Bye.